We got word early in the year that we might be doing a 23rd episode. So we have two composers, Jay Grushka and Chris Leonards, who leapfrog every other show. They work extremely well together, even though they don't work together. I think for the show, as somebody listening from the outside and just paying attention to the overall look of the show and the sound of the show, that, again, they come from different backgrounds, but they give us amazing work every week.
This badge was issued 68 years from now. Ace work, Grub Muncher.
44. I'm stuck in 1944?
I've been with the show from the beginning. The brief history is that Chris was hired by Eric, who created the show.
Eric and I were not only next-door neighbors in college for about 3 years, we were even fraternity brothers. So he was in the film school and I was in the music school, and I would always score his short films. So when Supernatural came up, he had sent me a script, and I loved the script, and and then once I started seeing parts of the pilot, it was amazing.
When Bob Singer was brought on as to executive produce with Eric, I think there was a small conversation, Eric saying, well, I have my guy to do music, and Bob said, well, I have my guy, and because of the general open-mindedness, they said, well, let's have both guys come to the spot the first episode. There was a great compatibility with Chris and I, just in terms of concept, and it was really an experiment that just worked out.
But there's always been 22 episodes a year, and it didn't make any sense to, timing-wise, it didn't make any sense to do something together, and then this year they added an episode, and so we got 23. And, and I think Phil was the first one who brought it up and said, well, why don't we split the 11-11 like we usually do, but let's have you guys split an episode together. And of course, Jay and I immediately said that was a great idea.
We have been in a lot of places for Supernatural, but we had not been to the gangster realm of 1944, so we find that we're chasing the god Cronus, the god of time, and he zaps Dean and himself back into 1944 outside of Cleveland, where we find Elliot Ness is the head of public safety, which he was in Cleveland in the 40s.
We found out about this 40s show, and the fact that we wanted to try to do a live group with jazz and going back in time, and it seemed like there's obviously going to be more work involved with doing this episode with all the musicians, but it also seemed like creatively it was a really interesting spot.
What's been really great fun, especially like in an episode like this, where there have been sprinkled throughout the seasons, is this complete other world that we get to go to musically, visually, musically, and otherwise, and that's what's kept it interesting this whole time.
Back in the 40s, World War II was at the forefront of people's lives. But also, it was kind of this era that was coming out of the Great Depression. And so people wanted to have fun, I think, and people wanted to, dance. So the music kind of, took that in and went with it. And this episode being a flashback to 1944 lent itself to new ideas for music.
Phil had this great band that he was a big fan of, which is these guys, the California Feet Warmers.
California Feet Warmers was a band that Phil came across.
There's these great, amazing, gritty, sort of Django Reinhardt-styled jazz musicians.
1944's era music, to me, is the guitar, the washboard, which really gives it that feel of that era of that time.
We knew we were working with a certain band, so we had a certain instruments that we were writing for.
This isn't the 40s jazz of New York City with shiny suits and a polished anything. This is the kind of band that you would find in a small club where they barely made enough money to just buy dinner and get home. And the fact that you have the washboard, which is very southern, a very gritty aspect, but it's budgetary. Back in that particular era, you needed somebody to play rhythm. You didn't want to lug around a drum set. Guy probably couldn't afford a drum set. Your washboard's a way you can get a little cymbal, a little scratch that sort of gives you the groove, and you jam them in a corner. Same thing with accordion is a situation where a piano takes up a lot of room.
Even though the editors cut the dialogue and they put in temporary music or temporary sound effects to show to the network or the studio, once we get the picture and the length of the show to where we want it, we lock it, is what we call locking the picture, meaning from this point on, the picture is going to stay this way. And we talk about what's outside the hotel room that the guys are in. Is it a city? Is it a country? Is it a truck stop? Is there a train nearby? We add all these things, these ideas in. And then we talk about the music.
Have you guys discussed how you're going to do this? Because I don't know how you're going to do it.
Rudimentary discussion, sort of top layer of. The idea with Phil was to say, let's look at it together with Dino, who's going to be getting our ins, outs. We'll talk some style, Phil, and the first thing that Chris and I have to get a handle on is how are we going to divvy it up?
Right.
We never have been in a room together until this episode. We've never, and still even this episode, he wrote his half the show, I wrote my half the show. We just spoke for an hour after we spotted the show and figured out who would do what.
We have two composers with two different sounds working at the same time. We went through with the composers both there, popping ideas back and forth to try and see how each section is going to be handled.
Back time the song to the ending.
Right.
So it ends with ba-da-ba-ba.
Exactly, which brings me to the next thought, which is that if we end up having to do a cue, we should not hear the start of the cue. It should be in motion.
Yes.
And
Oh,
we
yeah,
should
yeah,
also-
yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
Agreed. Yeah.
So we should have the start time of that cue be 3 or 4 or 5 seconds before we're actually going to hear it, where we start writing it from. So it's already in motion. And then within a day or two of the spotting session, the composers get a printed out spotting notes from the music editor. That's really the first solid piece of information that the composer has of, oh, here's how many minutes of score I have to write, and here's where it's going to go.
So for Supernatural, we normally it's a very quick turnaround from spotting session to final delivery. Normally we're spotting a session on a Thursday or Friday, and then the following week is when the composers and our sound guys, our sound editors, really just put their heads down and get to work. For the composers, that's when they're writing the music, they're recording the music, and they're mixing their stems to deliver by the following Monday. So they really just get 5 days to work on the score for any given episodes.
The thing that was interesting is we never get a chance to do a rehearsal with our normal scores. First of all, due to time. Second of all, due to budget. And so both Jay and I think we were doing it out of a little bit of fear because we hadn't really worked with these guys before.
So the band came in and we met at a place called The Alley. You see Jack White was in there and Jackson Brown and a whole bunch of names. Everybody's written their name on the with a Sharpie on the bricks.
Normally when you go in to record a score, in this town, you have people that you're generally familiar with and you know what you can get from them. And we didn't know exactly here, although we had we knew they were very musical, folk.
There's a part of you that's hoping this isn't going to derail because it was my idea, and if it all falls apart, it's my bad, and you don't want that to happen, and you're hoping that the musicians that you think will come through, and you're just hoping that they do a job that's up to the standards that Jay and Chris work at, and that everybody goes home in a limousine. That's what you're hoping.
And that, in a nutshell, was why we decided to rehearse to just break the ice and have it be a bunch of musicians in the room for the first time a few days before a record button was being pressed. But I don't think you guys have that part there when it walks up at bar 9. Da 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 da. As long as we walk up like in thirds like that.
So this is a young 20-something band. They're really young, and they're not business people, I don't think. They're artists. Are we in a Western?
When we first met with the band, I think Jay and I were nervous because we didn't know what they'd be able to do.
Everything's just...
Yeah, even hammer-ons if you can do them anywhere.
But I think they were probably more nervous than we were because they're like, oh my God, this isn't a club where people are half, 3 sheets to the wind. We got to do this, and we have to do it on time, and we have to get it on, not on tape, but on disc and get it on budget. And so I think they were nervous.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
We had them play our music first, and we had them playing the cues from the show, and it was good. It was pretty good. It wasn't great.
What I'm more interested in is just real pinpoint accuracy, you know what I mean? So that it's just boom, not bow, right? Great.
Take this home.
But then we said, you know what? Why don't you, after we finished the pizza and we had a couple of beers, we said, you know what? Play us a couple tunes. And so they played us 2 or 3 of their tunes. And they were screaming and shouting, and the clarinet player was dancing, and at the same time the guitar player was just hooting and hollering, and the energy level went up like 30%. And as soon as they were done, Jay and I kind of looked at each other and we're like, okay, so that's what we really want.
We're at the Henson Studios in Hollywood, and we are going to record parts of our soundtrack for Time After Time, episode 12 of season 7. And Henson Studios used to be A&M Records, Herb Alpert Studios, and before that, Charlie Chaplin.
That's one of the reasons we decided that we wanted to go and record at a studio like Henson, which used to be A&M Records, specifically because their mic collection was full of 1930s, 1940s, 1950s microphones. The shape of the room, the board, the amplifiers, all that stuff was very sort of idiomatic to that time because I didn't want it to feel like, us imitating that time. I wanted it to feel like we were sort of doing it right.
Hey, where do they want me?
Right there. I'm not sure where. The captain's here.
Yeah.
We're captain's here.
Yes,
come on.
sir.
Thanks for coming, man.
Yeah, no worries. Suddenly, you're in a studio with headphones on, and the balances are different, and someone who you're used to being 6 feet away from is now 20 feet away from you. A little bit of adjustment for people who haven't done it a lot.
I'll just look at you, and then you can pass it along to Marcus. And yeah, I'll look at I got you guys. You can see me, Carlos? Okay.
And we tried to make our writing have a little bit of leeway for each of these musicians so that there was things written on the page and things conceptually that needed to work, but we left, 10 to 40% of room for some improvisation and to take advantage of what their individual strengths were. And that's what I think made it feel organic. That's exactly right. And what I think we should do, Carlos, is at least for the first few rounds, let's not have any fill in there. Let's let the melody pick up that. And then once we're into serious blowing from people, anything you wish. But the whole idea of that bar 1 is that everybody's really tight on the break. This opening, super crisp. Like, really crisp on that opening. Here we go. 2.
every generation gets their own sort of music that they get to, and it's almost always rebellious. You know, there was classical music that was rebellious. When Stravinsky wrote The Rite of Spring, which was probably his most famous piece, and it premiered in Paris, people walked out. People threw stuff at the stage, you know. And then you get to America, and you've got, you know, jazz comes out, and everyone, all the grandparents are, you know, covering their ears the way, you know, it's the way my parents did when, you know, when I blasted my Metallica records. It's like, God, what is that noise? If there was a Dean in the 40s, he would kick this music in. If there was a stereo in the car, which there probably wasn't, or at least it was just radio, this is what he would turn on. He would turn on the radio station that did this, because this was the equivalent of AC/DC then.
When we saw you guys at the end last time and you played your own, it was great. Yeah. So let's go with that. If you want to shout, if you want to count, if you want to
make sheets,
do whatever. Just it's more about.
I should definitely be a shout.
Yeah, go for it. I mean, just like the most.
E
flat. Just have fun.
E flat.
So 1, 2.
Through the field, yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Wonderful.
Okay.
For me, it was really interesting to see not just the band, but just to see Jay and Chris in their element of the creation of the score. It was really interesting. It was great to see those guys. I've known them for years, and I've just never seen that from them, only because I haven't seen them in just doing their thing.
Both Jay and I come from a background. We were both in bands. There is something to being in a group of musicians where everyone plays off each other and hands off melodies and solos and things that absolutely cannot be, that magic cannot be repeated with a computer. It certainly can't be repeated by one person in a room.
What's great about using live players and using a band like that, it's like having a conversation, because now the individual instruments are having a conversation back and forth with each other, as well as the conversation of the characters now on the stage. We can see how all the pieces are fitting back together.
It made it more warm of a score because it's recorded at a stage where you get that natural sound of the instruments. And it just adds another layer and feeling to the score, which is nice.
I think just for everybody's experience and fun of it, you'll go in there and look at what you've played to picture a little bit. Just if some of you haven't had that experience.
Music really, really helps you scare the audience, make them laugh, make them cry. It's an integral part of what we do.
When Dean finally falls back and goes back in time, and there's that scene where the camera is pulling out through the alley, and all of a sudden you start hearing the music shift to 40s. If it shifts to 40s right when he's there, the audience doesn't get the experience of what Dean's going through. And so it was really important that the music started at the right place and that the music built at the right place. And it's sort of it's a very important thing to be able to time that the right way.
Hey! Hey! Hey, you! Drop the gun. Put it down, drop the gun. All right.
The first thing we said to Phil afterwards, the first thing both Jay and I said was, okay, when are we doing it again? We're ready, you know?
And I've done a lot of television, and I actually passed, I think in the last few episodes, about 500 hours. Wow, I'm tired. 500 hours of television since I've started doing television. That's a lot of shows. And I say with complete sincerity that this is one of the most fun projects I've ever been on for this 7 seasons. And I think it has mostly to do with the fact that there's a fantastically trusting atmosphere between all the creative elements.
And to be able to have a team like Phil and Todd and Bob and Kripke and Sarah and everybody else who not only do they want to make it look good and make it sound good on a general basis, but they want to do things like, you know what, let's send Dean back in time and 7 years later go into the studio and do something totally different from what we've been doing from the last 6.5 years. That's why this is fun. That's why we're all still here. It's why Jay's still here. It's why I'm still here. And it's why we all jump off, you know, when we're done recording, we're high-fiving and smiling, you know.
For me, there's 2 areas that I am so grateful for every day. One is the actual sitting down and sort of making up a new piece of music and maybe getting over some of the puzzle humps that it takes to make one work. That's a thrilling moment. And the other thrilling moment is having musicians perform it well. That's, you know, don't tell anyone, but I would do it for free.